drone holds station at roughly 300 meters, its camera locked on something that should not yet be in the wreck database. The image is familiar at first glance: a low, angular hull, a wide turret, Soviet lines that have defined armored warfare for 5 decades. But look closer, the roof is wrong. There is a structure welded over the turret that was not there 6 months ago. Fabric screens drape the turret rear and the engine deck, rubber flaps hanging at carefully studied angles. Someone at the factory thought hard about where drones hit tanks, and they built an answer in steel, rubber, and mesh, and then the drone dove anyway. And now this tank, with all its new answers, is a smear of ash and buckled plate in an open-source loss database. That gap between the factory delivering its best current thinking and the front line disproving it within months is the subject of this analysis. What open-source analysts catalog as Russia's newest T-72B3 modernization, designated by ORIX and various researchers as the Model 2025 package, is the latest in a rapid series of wartime upgrades to the T-72B3, the tank that forms the backbone of Russia's wartime armored force. As of the direct retrieval from the ORIX documentation project on June 10, 2026, 9 of these newest configuration tanks have been logged as losses: 6 destroyed, 3 damaged and abandoned. That number is small. It is also, as we will explain in detail, a documented floor, not a ceiling, and it arrives at a moment when the broader T-72 family has accumulated losses that are staggering in their scale. To understand what that figure means and why it arrived so quickly, you have to trace how this particular tank got here. The T-72 entered Soviet service in the 1970s as a product of compressed compromise, cheaper than the T-64, more capable than the T-62, and above all manufacturable in the quantities that Cold War wargaming considered decisive. The design was exported widely, licensed even more widely, and its hull became the foundation for successive generations of Soviet and Russian tank development. The T-72B3 emerged as a modernization program around 2010, aimed at bringing the most numerically common hull in the Russian inventory up to a standard that could face a modern battlefield. It received a new fire control system, updated thermal imaging, and an improved autoloader. It was not a new tank, it was an attempt to keep an old tank relevant. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the T-72B3 in its various subvariants was the single most common tank on the attacking force's order of battle. The ORIX documentation project, which logs equipment losses only when supported by photographic or video evidence that has been geolocated, began recording T-72B3 losses almost immediately. Within weeks, numbers were climbing into territory that made defense analysts take notice. What followed was an iterative race documented in open-source channels with unusual clarity. As losses mounted, Russian factories and repair facilities pushed out modified configurations, each generation responding, visibly, in ways analysts could catalog, to the specific threat environment the previous generation had failed to survive. The sequence matters, because the Model 2025 package did not arrive from nowhere. It arrived as the latest step in a chain that each time tried to answer a question the battlefield had already answered at the cost of the previous generation. The conflict intelligence team known as CIT identified what Militani reporting described as the first wartime modification cycle appearing from autumn 2022 onward. Then came changes researchers catalogued as the 2023 generation, adding modifications to the dynamic armor layout and introducing a standard overhead protective cage. Then, from the summer of 2024, analysts identified a new signature feature in vehicles being shipped from production and storage facilities. CIT noted that tanks dispatched from May 2024 onward began appearing with what Militani described as rubber and fabric shields designed to protect the rear of the turret and engine compartment. The key phrase is rear of the turret and engine compartment, because those are not arbitrary choices. Those are the specific zones where FPV drone strikes had been concentrated. The factory was reading the same footage that open source analysts were reading, and it was responding. That configuration is what ORIX began documenting as the OBBAR 2024 variant. It is important to note, and the research for this episode flags this clearly, that OBBAR 2024 inches and OBBAR 2025 inches are designations assigned by open source analysts and researchers, including CIT and ORIX. They are not confirmed official nomenclature from Uralvagonzavod, the primary manufacturer. When we use the Model 2025 designation, we mean what the OSINT community means by it, a tracking label for a specific cluster of visible modifications, not an official product code. The package that the OSINT community began tracking as the 2025 configuration was described in a March 2025 report by Militani, drawing on analysis by armor researcher Andriy Tarasenko. This package went further than the rubber and fabric screens. It added relic-type explosive reactive armor modules on the upper frontal hull, bolted rather than welded, creating an immediate visual identification feature. It introduced a factory-made anti-drone superstructure on the roof, not the improvised welded cages that had become endemic to both sides' vehicles, but a purpose-manufactured structure incorporating reactive elements. The package retained and extended the rubber hanging flaps. Tarasenko's term for them is burdocks, and extended dynamic protection to the aft shields, bringing the T-72B3's rear protection to a configuration described as similar to the T-90M standard. Read what that list describes. Bolted relict, replacing welded contact 5. A factory-made roof structure with ERA elements integrated. Rubber flaps over the engine deck and turret rear. Extended aft dynamic protection. Every single change addresses a drone-specific threat vector. The frontal arc ERA protects against missile and gunfire, certainly. But the roof structure is for drones. The rubber flaps are for drones. The extended aft coverage is for drones. The whole package is an architectural acknowledgement in metal and rubber and reactive plate that the primary threat to a T-72B3 in 2024 and 2025 is not a missile fired from 10 kilometers. It is a quadcopter from a kilometer away, flown by someone watching a first-person view screen. So what happened when this package met the battlefield? According to the ORIX documentation project, retrieved directly on June 10th of this year, 9 T-72B3 vehicles in this newest configuration have been logged as losses, 6 are listed as destroyed, 3 are recorded as damaged and abandoned. The first geolocated example in the wreck databases, per the War Spotting Loss database, entry 38552 records a T-72B3 Obaraquen 2025 destroyed near Serebryanka in the Siversk and Bakhmut sector. That entry carries a date of July 25, 2025. The variant was publicly described in March 2025. A geolocated wreck photograph was in open source databases by July 2025. That is roughly 4 months between "here is Russia's newest tank protection package" and "here is a dated photograph of that package having failed." Before proceeding to what that figure means in context, it is worth dwelling on the OSINT methodology behind the 9 tank count, because understanding how that number is constructed is essential to reading it correctly. ORIX operates on a single foundational rule: no entry without visual confirmation. A tank does not appear in the loss ledger because a commander reported it destroyed or a government press release claimed it. It appears when a photograph or video of that specific vehicle in a specific configuration that identifies it as the claimed variant has been geolocated. This is deliberate intellectual conservatism. It means ORIX's numbers are always, structurally, a flaw. For newly introduced variants, that flaw effect is compounded. When a T-72B3 OBA-25 burns, and 6 of the 9 documented examples were logged as destroyed, the fire does its own work on the identifying features. Rubber flaps char away. Bolt patterns on ERA mounts become hard to distinguish in post-fire photography. The factory superstructure buckles and fuses with the burned turret. A wreck that arrived on the battlefield as an identifiable newest generation tank can leave it as a photograph that analysts place in a catch-all unknown T-72 bucket, waiting for better imagery that may never come. ORIX's unknown T-72 entry, as of the June 10th retrieval, stood at 223 vehicles. Some fraction of those are certainly examples of newer variants whose distinguishing features burned away with the rest. When you read at least 9, both caveats apply simultaneously. 9 is what photographic evidence has confirmed, and brand new variants are systematically undercounted because their identifying features are exactly what fire destroys first. The true figure is higher. The 9 tank count gains its full weight only when placed against the broader T-72 loss ledger. As of the June 10th Oryx retrieval, the total documented Russian T-72 family losses across all variants stood as follows. The T-72A and T-72AV together accounted for 77 vehicles. The T-72B and its documented subvariants contributed 485. The T-72BA added 32. The T-72B3 family tracked across the base variant and its OBR 2014, OBR 2016, OBR 2022, and now OBR 2025 entries added 810 collectively. The unknown T-72 category carried 223. The sum across all T-72 family variants, confirmed visually geolocated, stood at approximately 1,827 documented losses. A corroborating figure from a 1945 analysis published in April of 2026 put Oryx documented Russian T-72 losses at 1,815 at that point and noted that Ukraine had lost 396 T-72 family vehicles by the same count, a reminder that both sides field Soviet-era hardware and that the platform's losses are, in that sense, shared. Those T-72 losses sit within a still larger total. The Oryx documentation project reached 4,000 documented Russian tank losses of all types in May 2025. As reported at the time by Militani, as of the June 10th retrieval, total documented Russian tank losses across all families had reached 4,397. Ukraine's General Staff has offered its own, considerably higher count, 10,864 tanks by May 2025, per Militani's reporting at the time. That figure comes from one party to the conflict using different counting methodology. We present it as Kiev's own, much higher claim. Some analysts have estimated, and here the sourcing runs through several layers of secondary reporting, which requires explicit hedging, that Russia's remaining tank reserve stands at roughly 2,000 vehicles, representing perhaps 40 to 50% of pre-war stockpiles, with much of what remains in poor condition. That estimate should be treated with the caution appropriate to indirect sourcing. What the open source record can support more directly is the production versus attrition frame. The loss rate for T-72 family vehicles across 3 years of documentation exceeds anything normal production and refurbishment cycles were designed to replace. Uralvagonzavod has been running at elevated tempo, and the loss ledger is still growing faster. To understand why even a purpose-built anti-drone protection package does not stop the attrition, you have to understand what FPV drone strikes actually do to tanks and what rubber flaps and mesh superstructures are and are not capable of preventing. The T-72B3's primary structural vulnerability, shared with every tank in the T-72 and T-90 family lineage, is the autoloader carousel. Soviet designers made a deliberate trade in the 1960s and 70s. They reduced crew from 4 to 3 by eliminating the human loader and replacing him with an automatic loading mechanism. That mechanism stores roughly 40 rounds of ammunition in a ring under the turret basket, in close proximity to the crew. Military analyst Sam Bendit of the CNA think tank, speaking about the related T-90M platform, which uses the same autoloader architecture, described the mechanism plainly. Any successful hit quickly ignites the ammunition, and the turret is literally blown off. The Oryx destroyed columns for every T-72 and T-90 variant carry imagery that corroborates this. The roof and engine deck are the zones FPV drone operators learn to target because they represent the thinnest armor over the most volatile contents of the vehicle. Top attack munitions, whether the Javelin anti-tank missiles overfly mode, artillery-delivered smart submunitions, or a quadcopter carrying a shaped charge warhead, all converge on the same logic. The frontal arc of a modern tank may be thick enough to defeat many threats, but the roof is not. What the rubber and fabric screens can do is partially address this overmatch. A screen hung over the engine deck can, under the right geometry and warhead type, cause a shaped charge to initiate before it reaches the armor surface, pre-detonating the warhead in the gap and reducing penetration depth. For some warhead types at some angles, this works. For a shaped charge that initiates even a few centimeters early, the jet still forms and still reaches the armor, just with reduced depth. Against the tandem charge warheads increasingly common in late-generation FPV munitions, the single-screen approach is less effective still. Against fiber optic FPV drones that replace the radio control link with an optical cable, making them immune to radio frequency jamming, the electronic warfare layer that formed part of Russia's vehicle protection concept becomes irrelevant to that specific threat entirely. The cable carries the operator's commands through a medium that electronic countermeasures cannot touch. The factory knows this. It knows it because the surveillance is immediate and relentless. Every time a tank burns on contested ground, there is a high probability that a drone was recording it. The footage was uploaded to Telegram within hours, and researchers in multiple countries were analyzing the imagery the same day. The feedback loop from battlefield to production floor has compressed to weeks or months, not the years or decades that characterized equipment development in previous conflicts. The Model 2025 package, with its bolted relic modules, factory-manufactured roof superstructure with integrated reactive elements, rubber flaps extended to the aft shields, represents the factory's best current answer to that feedback. Tarasenko's March 2025 description in Militani conveyed a genuine engineering effort, not a rushed weld job but a purpose-designed structure responding to the previous generation's documented failures. And by July 2025, per the War Spotting database, a geolocated example of that package was already in the REC record. The breakdown of the 9 documented losses is worth examining as analytical pattern, with the caveat that it is an inference, not a sourced conclusion. 6 of the 9 are destroyed, 3 are damaged and abandoned. In the broader T-72 loss records, older variants accumulate more abandoned examples because a vehicle that breaks down or is caught in a hasty withdrawal may be left with minor damage. The higher proportion of outright destruction in the OBRA 2025 data, 2 destroyed for every 1 abandoned, is consistent as an assessment with drone strike as the primary loss mechanism rather than mechanical breakdown or crew evacuation. A drone strike that initiates the ammunition carousel leaves very little to abandon. This reading is offered as assessment, not conclusion. For the OSINT analyst community, the T-72B3 modernization sequence serves as a case study in what battlefield evidence can tell us about industrial logic under pressure. The modifications are not random. They are a coherent response to a coherent problem. The shift from welded contact 5 to bolted relict is a specific engineering choice. Bolted modules can be replaced if damaged, and the bolt pattern is a visual identifier from 100 meters of drone altitude. The factory-made roof superstructure with integrated ERA signals that the solution has moved from field improvisation to the production line itself. The extension of aft protection to T90M standard signals that the T-72B3 is now being held to the family's flagship rear arc protection requirement. Each of these choices is readable as a document, and the document says, the factory is trying to turn the T-72B3 into a vehicle that can survive what the previous generation could not. The document also says, with the same plainness, that the effort is arriving in the loss database within months of each new iteration. The Oryx table for the T-72B3 family captures this progression in columns of numbers: 379 for the base B3 variant, 5 for the OBRA, 2014, 298 for the OBRA, 2016, 119 for the OBRA, 2022, and now 6 destroyed and 3 damaged and abandoned for the OBRA, 2025. The sequence moves from left to right across a timeline of the war, each entry representing a production generation, each entry representing a factory's best answer to the battlefield of its moment, and each entry eventually translated into a photograph in a geolocation database. The OBRA 2025 entries are the newest addition, they will not remain at 9. The variant is in service. The documentation infrastructure is running continuously. As more geolocated photographs emerge, and as the unknown T-72 bucket is worked further for subtypes, the count will climb. The question the open source record cannot answer, and this episode is careful not to speculate beyond what sources support, is whether the factory's current modernization tempo can produce vehicles faster than that count rises. What the record can say, grounded in photographs and geolocation and documented methodology, is that 4 years of iterating the T-72B3's protection architecture have each produced a package that appeared in the REC database within months of entering service. The Armorer's Bench has documented instances of multiple drones deployed against single high-value vehicles. In some cases, simultaneous engagements reported to involve upward of 40 drones against one target. Saturation logic, where the defense's probability of defeating each individual warhead is multiplied across enough attempts to guarantee eventual penetration, is difficult to solve with passive screening. You can raise the number of strikes needed to defeat the tank. You cannot make it require infinite strikes with finite armor. The drone holds station. The camera records. Somewhere in an open source database, a researcher compares the bolt pattern on the ERA mount to the reference photograph, confirms the rubber flaps on the turret rear, and types the designation into a new entry. The floor count increments by 1. Both caveats apply. Visually confirmed floor, new variant identification lag means the real number is higher. The methodology is sound. The factory is still running. The loss ledger is still open. That is where the open source record leaves this.